In the winter of 1241, the greatest army the medieval world had ever seen was camped 3 days from Vienna. They had just destroyed the combined military forces of Poland and Hungary in 2 simultaneous battles fought on the same day, 300 kilometers apart. The Knights of Europe, the finest heavy cavalry of the medieval world, had been dismantled so completely that there was no organized military force left between the Mongol army and the Atlantic Ocean. Vienna was 4 days away. Paris was 2 weeks away. The Atlantic was open. And then, nothing. The army that had never been stopped simply stopped, turned around, rode east, and never came back. The survival of Western Europe in 1241 was not a military achievement. It was not heroic resistance. It was not geographic advantage or divine intervention. It was the death of one man from drinking too much, 4,000 kilometers away. And that accident is the reason the world you live in exists in the form it does. This is the story of what almost happened, and what the world looks like if it had. To understand the scale of what almost happened, you need to understand what the Mongols actually were, because the popular image, violent nomadic hordes with no strategy, is almost the precise opposite of the truth. The Mongol military machine built by Genghis Khan was the most sophisticated military organization the medieval world had ever produced. 3 foundations made it unstoppable against every army it encountered. Mongol armies traveled at rates their enemies considered literally impossible. European commanders, receiving reports of Mongol advances, consistently discounted them because the distances covered were beyond anything their own forces could achieve. By the time they accepted the reports were accurate, the Mongols were already there. Intelligence. Before every campaign, Mongol agents spent months, sometimes years, inside enemy territory, mapping roads, identifying supply lines, cataloging political divisions between rival lords that could be exploited. The Mongols never attacked blind. They arrived with more information about enemy territory than the enemy's own commanders possessed. Adaptability. The Mongols absorbed the best military technology of every civilization they conquered: Chinese siege engineers, Persian administrators, Arab navigators, and integrated it immediately. The army that reached Europe in 1241 was not the army that had left Mongolia 20 years earlier. It was a constantly evolving organism that incorporated the strengths of every enemy it had ever defeated. Against this machine, European heavy cavalry was almost completely ineffective, and the Battle of Legnica proved it. April 9, 1241. The combined forces of Poland, the Teutonic Knights, and the Knights Templar faced the Mongol advance force. These were experienced commanders leading forces that had never been defeated by any contemporary European army. The Mongols opened with a feigned retreat. The cavalry that appeared to be fleeing was not fleeing. It was drawing the European knights forward, stretching their formation, separating fast cavalry from slower infantry, creating gaps in the line that the retreating force then turned to exploit with encircling fire. The European knights did exactly what their training told them to do. They charged, they pursued, they extended their formation, and then the Mongol flanks closed around them. The army of Poland and the military orders of Europe was destroyed in a single engagement. The same day, 300 kilometers south, Subutai's force destroyed the Hungarian army at Mohi using different but equally devastating tactics. 2 battles, same day, 2 separate armies eliminated. The military power of Central Europe, gone in 24 hours. And now the detail that changes everything you thought you knew about why Europe survived. The Mongols did not stop because they were defeated. They were not defeated. They were not seriously threatened. What they encountered in Poland and Hungary was the best resistance Latin Christendom could offer, and it had been dismantled without ambiguity. They did not stop because of terrain. West of Vienna the land became more forested, less ideal for cavalry, but the Mongols had fought in forests before. Terrain had never stopped them. They stopped because in December 1241, Ögedei Khan, son of Genghis Khan, supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, died in Mongolia. Under Mongol law, all senior commanders were required to return for the Kurultai, the great assembly to select the next great Khan. Batu Khan and Subutai were 3 days from Vienna. They turned around and rode 4,000 kilometers east. One man, one death, 4,000 kilometers away. That is the full width of the margin between the world we live in and the world that ended in 1241. If Agade does not die in December 1241, the advance continues in spring 1242. Vienna falls first. The city had no military force capable of resistance. It had been expecting the Mongol attack and had already begun evacuating. Its walls were medieval. Its defenders were remnants of the armies already destroyed. Then Germany. Politically fragmented, militarily exhausted from internal conflicts between rival princes, with no unified command structure capable of organizing coordinated resistance across a territory the size of modern France and Germany combined. Then France, where Louis XIII was a capable king commanding forces that had already proven completely inadequate against Mongol tactics in every engagement. The Atlantic is not a military obstacle, it is a geographic endpoint. The Mongols stop there because there is nowhere further to go, not because anything stops them. Now here is the answer to what Europe looks like under Mongol administration. And this is the detail that changes the moral complexity of this question completely. The Mongols were not interested in cultural destruction for its own sake. They were interested in control and extraction. Civilizations that submitted were generally left intact, taxed heavily, required to supply soldiers, but administratively functional. The Mongol Empire at its peak was the largest free trade zone in human history. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, allowed merchants to travel safely from China to Persia to the edges of Europe for the first time. Goods, ideas, and technologies moved across the largest governed territory the world had ever seen. Under Mongol administration, Europe would not have been destroyed, it would have been absorbed. But absorption comes with consequences that reach far beyond taxation. The feudal system, the rigid hierarchy of kings, lords, knights, and serfs that organized medieval European society, would have been dismantled. Not from ideology but from administrative efficiency. The Mongols needed tax revenue and military conscripts, not feudal obligations between local lords competing for the same territory. Without feudalism, the specific social conditions that made the Renaissance possible disappear. The concentration of wealth in Italian city-states, the merchant class that developed in the gaps between feudal obligations, the patronage system that funded Leonardo, Michelangelo, Galileo. All of it depended on the specific chaos of feudal competition that Mongol administration would have eliminated. And here is the irony that should genuinely disturb you. Without the feudal fragmentation of Europe into dozens of competing kingdoms, the specific competitive pressure that drove European military and technological innovation over the next 4 centuries disappears. The arms race between France and England, the naval competition between Spain and Portugal, the commercial rivalry between Venice, Genoa, and Florence. That competition, wasteful, violent, enormously costly in human lives, accidentally produced the age of exploration. It produced the scientific revolution. It produced the specific version of modernity that eventually connected every human civilization on Earth. Does Columbus sail west in 1492 under Mongol-administered Europe? Almost certainly not. There is no Spanish kingdom to fund him. There is no competitive pressure between states to find alternative routes to Asian trade. There is no need. The Mongol road is already open. Does the Renaissance happen without the specific wealth distribution of feudal European city-states? Does the scientific revolution happen without the specific intellectual competition between rival European universities? Does the Enlightenment produce democratic political philosophy in a continent administered as a unified Mongol province? Possibly, but differently, and possibly not at all. The civilization we call modern Western civilization, with its democratic institutions, scientific method, individual rights, and global connectivity, may have required the specific chaos and fragmentation and violent competition of medieval Europe to emerge. The very weakness that made Europe helpless against the Mongols may have been the source of everything that made European civilization eventually dominant. The Mongol Empire itself collapsed faster than almost anyone in 1241 would have predicted. By 1368, the Yuan dynasty in China had been overthrown. By 1400, the empire had fragmented into successor states, fighting each other with the same ferocity their ancestors had directed outward. The greatest land empire in history lasted less than 2 centuries in unified form. What it left behind was not conquest. It was connection. The Silk Road under Pax Mongolica moved goods, ideas, technologies, and diseases. The Black Death, which killed between 1/2 of Europe's population in the 14th century, traveled west along Mongol trade routes. The same roads that carried silk and spice carried the plague that broke feudalism by creating labor shortages so severe that serfs could demand wages for the first time in history. The Mongols shaped the Europe they did not conquer as profoundly as the civilizations they actually absorbed. Through plague, through trade, through the political disruption in the Islamic world that redirected intellectual and commercial energy in directions that eventually reached European universities and changed them. History does not work in straight lines. The empire that almost conquered everything changed the world. It did not conquer more than it changed the world it did. And this is the question that the Mongol story forces into the open, one that has no clean answer and deserves none. Is the world, without Mongol conquest of Europe, better or worse than the world we actually got? The actual world produced European colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade, the destruction of indigenous civilizations across 2 continents, 2 world wars, nuclear weapons pointed at every major city on Earth. It also produced democracy, modern medicine, the scientific method, the technology that connects 8 billion people, and allows you to watch this video right now. A Mongol-administered Europe might have produced none of the worst of those things. It might also have produced none of the best. That is not a rhetorical question. It is the actual question. And the honest answer is that nobody knows. Because history does not offer controlled experiments. It offers one timeline, the one that actually happened, and the permanent uncertainty of everything else. Ugade Khan died of excessive drinking at a celebration in December 1241. That specific, accidental, undignified death is the reason the modern world exists in the form it does, with all its disasters and all its achievements arriving together in the same package, inseparable from each other. Every civilization that has ever existed has believed, at some point, that it was the final form of human organization. Rome believed it. The Mongols believed it. The British Empire believed it. Every power that has ever stood at the edge of its maximum expansion has looked at the horizon and seen nothing capable of stopping it. And every one of them has been wrong. The Mongols had their Ugade moment. Rome had its. Every empire in human history has had its specific, often accidental, often invisible turning point. The moment that stopped what seemed unstoppable. The question for every civilization, including the one you live in, is not whether that moment will come. It is whether anyone will recognize it when it does. Now here is what I want you to do before you leave this video. Think about this question and drop your answer in the comments, because there is no right answer, and that is exactly why it matters. If the Mongols had conquered Europe, is the world better or worse than the one we actually got? No colonialism, no Renaissance, no Atlantic slave trade, no scientific revolution, no world wars, no modern medicine. Better or worse? The comments on this video are going to be more interesting than almost anything I can add. So drop your answer, defend it, and read what other people think, because the best arguments are going to come from the people watching this right now. The next video on this channel takes this question further, because the Mongols are not the only civilization that came within a single decision of changing everything. The next story is about a civilization that did not stop, and what it did to every culture it encountered. It is darker than this one, and it drops in 4 days. Subscribe, because if you leave without subscribing, the algorithm will not show it to you, and this is one you will not want to miss.